Hey, this is Ryan Cower with part 2 of the free lesson on using things you already know, like the triads and major scale, to create an outside sound. This is part 2, focusing on the use of the major scale. If you enjoy this lesson, please schedule one-on-one Skype lessons with me through my website. Thank you. Many of these concepts will contain wrong notes and unconventional tensions. And what I mean by unconventional tensions is a natural 7 on a dominant 7 or something like that. So it is important to understand the principles of tension resolution. Personally, I believe that you can play any of the 12 notes over any chord. Every single note is an available pitch to use. There are no wrong notes, you just have to know how to resolve them properly. And you resolve the altered tensions to the underlying notes of the harmony or the chord scale because these notes properly suggest the function of the chord. So for example, the tensions that you would commonly run into are flat 9, 9, sharp 9, 11, sharp 11, flat 13, and 13. Flat 9 resolves down a half step to the root. 9 can resolve up to the third, or the flat 3 in a minor chord, or down a whole step to the root. Sharp 9 resolves a half step up to the third. The 11 resolves to the third, or the flat 3 in a minor, or up to the fifth, or flat 5 in a minor 7, flat 5, or diminished 7 chord. Sharp 11 resolves up a half step to the fifth. Flat 13 resolves down a half step to the fifth. Sharp 5 resolves up a half step to the 13th, and the 13th resolves down to the 5th or can go up to the 7th. So the next way to create an outside sound using things you already know is using the major scale. The first way to do that is using the concept of opposite quality, which you already talked about in terms of triads. So if you were soloing over a C major 7 chord using a C Ionian chord scale, or in some cases a C Lydian, this concept would allow you to play any C minor mode. So you could play a C Dorian, a C Phrygian, or a C Aeolian over the C major 7 chord. Typically I use this concept in conjunction with the normal chord scale, the Ionian or the Lydian, because this concept creates a lot of tension. So the next way to use the major scale to create an outside sound is using the concept of sidestepping. This involves weaving lines in and out of the main chord scale and the chord scale of the same quality a half step above and or below the root of the chord. For example, if the chord is C7 and is functioning as a primary dominant in the key of F major, it is appropriate to use the C Mixolydian chord scale. To add the outside notes, you could play a D flat Mixolydian or a B Mixolydian. You can either completely superimpose one scale choice over the whole duration of the given chord, or you can weave lines in and out of the 3 available choices for a more polytonal sound. By that I mean it contains pitches and patterns from 3 different scales. The last way to use the major scale in this context is to use the major scale a tritone way. This is kind of related to the harmonic principle of tritone substitution. It involves taking the chord scale and playing it a tritone away from the root of the chord. For example, if the chord is C7 and you're using a C Mixolydian, you can play a G flat Mixolydian. Alright, so why do these concepts work? You may have been asking yourself this question all throughout this lesson. Why are we suddenly able to use all of these unconventional tensions and so-called wrong and outside notes? The answer has to do with the conditioning that we have to music. We are very conditioned to respond normally to certain collections of pitches and patterns because we have been hearing them all of our lives. Most of the music we hear in our formative years is very tonal and unadventurous in terms of altered tensions and chromatic harmony. Most of us respond well to the intervallic structure of the major scale, the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half structure, and the tertial structure of triads. In other words, these structures are consonant, so-called home base structures that have been drilled into our brain and ears throughout years and years of hearing them. Thus, when we hear a note that conflicts with the intervals and structures, we perceive it as out and in many cases wrong. By using triads in the major scale to achieve these outside sounds, we can take advantage of the nearly universal acceptance of the triadic sound. By using a familiar structure such as a triad or the major scale to create these outside lines, you are doing so in a very familiar, relatable, and accessible way to the listener. Our ears can recognize the intervallic patterns as being derived from the major scale or triadic structures, even though the pitches they contain are not technically in the key. This makes the outside line more cohesive, logical, and relatable to the ear.